Hi, everybody. It helps when you turn the mic on, Rick.
That music was so good. I was grooving out.
There's a reason we call this Friday Push to Prod, and we do it at 5 o'clock on a Friday. This is exactly what you get for doing that. Welcome, everyone. This is, of course, Friday Push to Prod. We're really happy everyone is here. We're happy our guests are here. I'm happy Katie is here. Katie's not thrilled right now. Katie had a long day yesterday.
You're outing me.
I'm not out yet. No, I'm not going to out you on the secret
here.
thing you told me. I would never do that.
Oh, gosh. Oh, my gosh.
But Katie had a late night. So if Katie's quiet, please excuse her.
I'm a little sleepy. Thank you.
We have a couple of really great guests today. We're going to be talking about game design, which I think not everybody really grasps what it is or what does it mean when you say I'm a game designer. So we thought this would be a really great conversation. As Katie's pointing out, even some of us in the industry, because it changes at different studios, right? What a game designer does. So we're going to let our guests introduce themselves. We'll start with Amor. We'll go alphabetically.
Hello, I am Amor Estandian. I'm a senior game designer with Pipeworks Studios in the Northwest USA. I've been on a number of games, a lot of games that people maybe have heard of, some that they haven't heard of. But our studio is known for working on a lot of big franchises, things like Madden, Terraria, even game show things like Jeopardy, Wheel of Fortune, things like that. So it kind of spans everything from kind of household names as well as just other IPs that people might be familiar with.
I played some of those.
Yeah, I've played a couple of them too. Yep. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Well, hi, I'm Ziba, and I've spent the last 12 years being an indie, basically running a little studio called PopCannibal out in Boston. Spent 10 of those years working with the same creative partner and artist, Luigi. So it's mostly two of us doing game ideas. I do all the programming, he does the art, and we've been working with a third guy for music. So we're Clark for a number of years. I have a background in serious games, or games whose primary purpose is not entertainment. So I actually 10 years ago, I did a master's degree at Michigan State in designing these very serious games, and I've done a fair amount of contracting in those topics and back and forth, but I mostly end up making my own games, which I don't try and make them serious, but they end up that way sometimes. Most recently I made Kind Words, Lo-Fi Chill Beats to Write To. That one's about exchanging letters with people, and it does tend to get very emotional and serious, but that's what I'm up to.
Oh, that sounds very cool. I have to ask, I don't mean to derail the conversation right as we get going. What is a serious game?
Oh, nobody wants to answer that question. I mean, that's you have meaningful games, edutainment. So, I would put it, that's why usually when I say serious game, I try and clarify games whose primary purpose is not entertainment. That could be persuasion or exercise, education.
Gotcha.
It's just a difficulty multiplier on top of making a game fun. Sure,
I can imagine. I mean, and I was curious when you said it, because it's like 20 years in this industry. I don't think I've ever heard serious game before. It's fascinating to me that you can be in this industry forever and still be learning new things every day.
I don't think I've heard it called that. I've heard of gamification of certain elements, you know.
My degree is 10 years old. It may have fallen out of favor already. That's a lifetime.
I love the term.
I love it.
I'm going to start using it now. So
I do too.
Yeah.
If it's gone away, we'll bring it back.
It kind of throws shade at other types of games. Like, no.
A little bit.
There's around.
Twitter just exploded. It's like, all games are serious. No. So let's jump into the topic. And I guess, Ziba, we'll let you go first. What is it that a game designer does? What is game design?
It is.
And you only have 3 hours. Go.
Right, go.
It's a wildly different job from place to place. I'm sure Amor and I have really different day-to-day responsibilities on these things. You know, I'm also, since I'm basically running a small studio, and I'm on my best days beholden to mostly no one, and so it's just me trying to stumble through and try and cross that gap between things I wish existed and making them exist, and then measuring up, did what I just do actually match what I wanted it to be? Is it going to, are other people going to react to it in the way I wanted it to? Is it going to have the effects on people that I wanted? And so for me, a lot of game design comes from, I have a very minor, undergrad background in live theater. And for me, a lot of game design is sort of preparing for a show and pulling together the ideas and rehearsing everything and saying, well, if we put these elements together, the audience is going to go wild. And then actually putting out a game is, you're selling those tickets and running that show, and who knows what happens.
And you're hoping
to your
have
precious play once it's going running.
Oh, geez. No pressure. Amor, what is game design? From your point of view, it's your studio.
We spin a lot of plates, if I were to put it in one sentence. But it really is about driving the overall experience of the game and the vision of the game. And from within the team, it's working with, because I work in a company that has almost 200 people. Our teams vary in size, but often our designers, we work very closely with all the other disciplines, art, engineering, production, to kind of create the experience that we seek out to do. And so we're often looked to kind of vision holder. It can be one way to look at it, but just kind of look at the experience of the game and say, how can we make a cohesive experience, taking into account everything that everyone else on the team wants to do with it.
And do you also, guys, do you also occasionally have to say, that sounds great, but doesn't quite fit within what we're trying to do here? I mean, do you guys kind of have to, like, I know Amor, you said sort of, you're kind of shepherding the vision of the game, right? Are there times where in that role, someone may come up with a great idea that just doesn't fit? Where does that part of the role fit in, or is that really not your jobs? Let's go with Amor.
Well, it sort of depends, depends on the team and where the designer fits in with it. Often, the lead designer kind of has a bit more say in terms of what's going on, where they can take a look at a concept that someone brings up and says, "Hey, here's a really good idea that I have." And as the lead, generally you should be open to listening to all ideas and examining it alongside the team. But sometimes if it comes to that point where you're like, maybe not, or maybe, hey, how can we make this work with everything else that's going on in the game?
Cool. Ziba, as both like the owner of the studio and a designer, how does that change for you? I mean, you've got the game vision, but then you've also got to shepherd the studio as a whole, right?
Yeah. Well, I really get to spend my time doing as dumb a thing as I want to, and so I have to be aware, it becomes a personal thing where I have to be aware of, one of my repeated failings is I fall in love with my own ideas very hard before I've possibly really got good reason to. And so I do try and discuss my ideas early and often with whoever I can, and then try and prevent myself from behaving excessively defensively about how brilliant my ideas are and how could you not like them. It's and this is the struggle everybody around me has to put up with.
But with a tiny team, you can be in a bit of an echo chamber, right? Like, you could have people that love you, so they want to love your ideas. Or so how, if you were only working with one or two others, do you bring in outside help? Do you like friends that are in the industry or other peers, or do you get consultants? Like, how would you bounce ideas off of people that aren't just used to you doing everything wonderfully and wanting to say yes to you all the time?
Sure. I'm flattered that you imagine I have such a dedicated following, but I get your point. I really love the Boston community here. There's a big online presence. We used to have a lot of in-person meetings that were really valuable to go to, and now we have a very active Slack and some other channels that I really do get the privilege of communicating with a lot of my game design peers very regularly, and that's wonderful.
Oh, good. You and Rick
Well,
probably know
Austin
almost.
shout out.
I was just going to say you and Rick probably know almost all of the same people.
Probably. Although, while we've never met, we probably do have a lot of overlap in our circles. I'm sure.
Yeah.
Very sure.
I just reserved the barbecue pit down in Danahee Park for the Boston Indies barbecue.
All right.
An announcement that's happening. You can
Right
come on,
on.
come on, Amor. You're invited too.
Yeah, come on. Just hop
Come
a
on
plane,
over,
buddy.
just hop
Come on
a
over.
plane. What's 3,000 miles between friends?
Right? Katie will drive in. It'll be great.
Ziba,
Katie
how
will
much?
bring the rum. She can smuggle in the good stuff.
Yeah, I'll bring the screech from Newfoundland.
There you go.
How much time, Ziba, is creative then, and how much is technical? Because I know in design you often have to, maybe do one or the other, but sometimes both, and maybe sometimes a lot of both, a lot of each.
Oh, yeah. It's I probably end up doing 80% technical actually myself,
Really?
because I can just think of brilliant ideas far faster than I can program them to prove they weren't that brilliant.
Got
And
you.
so I've just got this backlog of ideas that, like, yeah, this is so great, but it's going to be forever for me to test them. And so you whittle them down to what you can do, and working on those. It's just such fuel to come up with ideas that powers me. All right, let's actually type this.
Okay. What about you, Amor?
Yeah, it's depending on the phase of where we are in the game. Certainly early on, far more brainstorming, far more creative juices are flowing. We're kind of working to figure out what we'd like to do. And then once we kind of get to a point where we're like, okay, can we prototype it? Much like Ziba, we get in there and we start building it, and then we spend a lot of time playing with it and tweaking it. And then some of the creativity, I mean, obviously continues to flow through, where we continue to think about what we've built, right? We'll go through, we'll play it, we'll show other people, we'll get feedback, or we'll see how they play. And then we kind of think on those things that we see, and we go back into the game and we start changing things up. So I mean, very similarly, ideas, have a ton of them. Ideas are easy. It's really going in and executing and making something really, really special is where we spend a lot of our time, which does end up meaning a lot of technical, right? Where we're trying to build it. As a designer, who is mostly focused on both the content and the user experience, I still implement a lot of the content, but I do have a lot of engineers and programmers that I work with when it starts to get a little harder. So it's a balance, and no day's the same for me, but it just kind of depends where we are in the game, how early or how late we are, as well as the level at which we need something highly technical done.
Yeah, because toward the end, you're probably doing less design, hopefully. Yeah, I love what you said, because no day is the same. Like when people ask me to describe, oh, what do you do? I'm like, I wish I could tell you, but no day is the same. I don't think anyone in the game industry has, except maybe the business guys, I don't know, have the same day ever.
Yeah.
And that's part of the joy of working in the industry, I think.
Absolutely. I would agree with that. Yeah. And even I think some of the business guys don't really ever have the same day, right? Because everybody in this industry is always confronted with everything changed overnight. No, God, now what are we going to do? Right. The budget got changed. The numbers don't look as great as they did yesterday. And our Steam wish lists fell flat suddenly. And there's a ton of pressures in this industry that can change on a dime.
Pushed a prod on Friday.
Somebody pushed a prod on a
We're
Friday.
screwed.
Right.
So much of what is, if you find out the right thing to do in games, in business, in design, in marketing, anything, if you find out what the right thing is, then everybody does it, and it's no longer the right thing.
Right.
You have to do something else next time to get attention.
Got to be
and
fresh.
It has to be bigger.
Absolutely.
It not only has to be completely different, but it has to be 10 times bigger, and yet exactly the same, because the fans are looking to repeat that experience, right? So there's these really strange, conflicting, almost edicts from the players. How do you guys deal with that? Ziba, let's start.
I have not been good at building a consistent brand or expectation for what do you come to me to, right? I've got a writing game. Before that, it was a physics-based sailing game. Before that, it was a matching puzzle game, a poetry writing game. I guess don't come to me for some great gun shooting action. I just haven't delivered that. But aside from that, it's not like I can disappoint my audience because I ain't even trying to sell the same thing to the next people. So I've solved the problem by not even trying to do good building an audience. I don't know.
But that's its own challenge, isn't it? Because you're always targeting a wholly new audience, right?
Yeah, so like I've partnered with, in very small ways, something like 6 different publishers. Always sort of on different terms, different reasons, because I don't really have the bandwidth. Some things I'll self-publish on other platforms, but I'm always looking for someone else to pick up. Here's what this person did. How do we relate that to the public? I wish I had an even better pipeline for that. I would love to be in a spot where I make what I want, and then I have a great partner who's just like, okay, I know we can sell it to these people. But that's sort of like it's a stumbling element that I have in between thinking of it, creating it, and then connecting it to the world solidly.
Nice. Amor, how about you? What is that feeling of, all right, we're going to make the next game. How do we either retain our audience or find that new audience? And I guess for you gave a list of licensed games, at the start. How does that impact the whole decision-making process? I'm sure there's a ton of constraints there.
There are. It varies depending on what we're doing. Over the years, we've done so many different types of games, and so and currently, we have multiple teams working on different games. So the expectation is, not unlike Ziba's explanation. It's hard to retain the exact same audience because we delve into so many different types of games and categories that we're in. I mean, we have people who play Madden. We have people who play Terraria. We have people, we have a poker game that we continue to run in live. We have poker players. So it spans, and it just kind of depends on the audience that we cater to. So it kind of is more dependent on per team. So, I mean, we have a Madden team that rolls from one Madden to the next. So they kind of know what to expect. With our poker group, we've had a couple different poker games. They know what to expect. So it kind of just depends. In terms of my personal experience, I've floated from puzzle games to an educational MMO to a game that I'm working on now, which is a competitive CCG. And so on a personal level, I have no idea how to gauge that. I'm not the person making that decision. So it's really about kind of putting my head into what I'm working on at the time and really just kind of living and breathing that as I'm in that game.
I was going to say, you're talking about constraints based on the game and thinking about the audience, but there are also constraints, I would imagine, if you're using a established IP, from the IP holders themselves, like from those stakeholders, because I know I've worked on some big IPs, and there are things that we'd love to do, and it gets nixed, at the start.
Or something like Madden, right? Where now you've got multiple stakeholders telling you what's permitted and what's not. Because even if EA says sure, there's always the looming specter of the NFL itself, right? I mean, how does that impact design and your freedom? Again, Madden's probably one of those games where it's like there's a certain, it's pretty much on rails to an extent with what has come before, but how does that impact the thinking going into, how do we make this year's Madden better?
Right. And so to be clear, I'm not on a Madden team. So I can speak to my experience. I'm working on the CCG I mentioned is actually a Magic the Gathering brand. And so we work with Wizards of the Coast on that. And there's a lot of meetings where we discuss, hey, here's where we are on this particular feature or this particular piece of content that we'd like to do. and we present that. We've done the work on our side internally, and then we work with their side of it, digital publishing, and we talk about it. And so it does become a lot of back and forth, a lot of collaboration, and we do get those moments where maybe we bring something to the table and they are like, well, maybe not this specifically, but we can do this. So it's always a lot of back and forth. We have, we try to be very respectful, of course, to the IP and the license, and really try to embody what they're going for. And because it's Wizards, they have a lot of content experts on their side. And so if there was ever a question of, hey, would this character even say this thing? They have like a whole team that would tell us yes or no, or they would come back with a list of things. No, but here's how they would say it, and we'd be like, great. And so it's really, I think one great thing about where I work, we've done a lot of partnerships. We've worked on a lot of licenses, and over the years, we've really kind of honed and refined that, not just on the design side, but like the production, the leadership. They've all really, a lot of us have a lot of great experience working with partners, and trying to, one, make a great game, a fun experience, and then two, how can we infuse whatever it is we're working with while still being able to keep our own voice intact. It's that whole balance, that dance of how can we make something really cool that is us, but how can we also be, in this case, magic, right? So yeah.
Cool. I'm listening to this, and Ziba, I'm sure you come at this from a very different perspective, but what does like a clean sheet of paper look like to you guys? It's got to be kind of daunting, right? I mean, here you are at the start. Where are we going? What are we doing? What are we going to build? And I'm going to guess, Ziba, you and Amor are going to have really different answers, because Amor, I think you're dealing more with like licensed stuff and things that are coming in with a pretty good definition at the start. But Ziba, as a person who owns and runs a studio and are responsible, for creative design, what does that clean sheet look like to you?
I mean, right, it's a terrifying responsibility. I will say that a good portion, less so now, but a good portion of my career has been doing contract work as a company. That often does come in with interesting set of almost IP. I worked for one of the more interesting projects. I worked with Northeastern Law School in partnership on a game about representing yourself in court. And so they actually, had all this dialogue, and they aren't game designers. But one of the hardest parts in serious games or persuasive games and meaningful games is partnering that content expert with a game creator. Just like the Magic team knows exactly how they would do. I was sitting in a room with a lawyer who could tell me whether or not I could have the characters say this, because this is actually going to be given to the public as a example of how you should behave in court, and I don't know that. So it's a fascinating challenge of serious games to have. It's a bit like a very restrictive IP, because you want to be faithful to it.
Right. I can't imagine trying to create a game about maybe not being a lawyer, but at least representing yourself legally in that environment without any legal experience. That even with a subject matter expert,
it boils down to a lot of like multiple choice questions with sort of real answers. There's a little like adventure thing on top, and the bottom it was like, what should I wear today? Maybe my dress suit and tie, my cutoff jeans, stuff like that, or how should I address a judge? Hey, what's up, man? Your honor, or stuff like that.
Yeah,
but that would be true of anything. If you make a game about cooking, you wouldn't want someone putting cumin in your brownies, kind of thing. Like, you'd want to have consulting or knowledge, somebody with knowledge about the subject material you're working on, I guess.
Yeah, what cranks it up a notch is you've got state or federal funding, and a potential for a lawsuit if they cite you as the reason they misbehaved in court or something. Like
this is serious games, folks.
Wow,
he just put the serious in serious games.
That's crazy.
I was going to ask you, in not just that situation where you're trying to kind of tread carefully around those kinds of design choices. But I guess in any aspect, do you find working on a smaller team, i.e. yourself or maybe one or two others, easier or more limiting than working with if you have a bigger team of designers, you can kind of farm out each aspect of what you're doing. For example, you could have an economy expert, or you could have an expert about another aspect of design, or someone who can use prototypes, that kind of thing. So I'm just wondering, which do you prefer? I think I know the answer because of what you both do, but I know what I prefer.
Right.
Ziba, what do you think?
Well, outside of my educational situation, I don't think I've had the tyranny of being the designer of all my projects. But for contracting, I'll often just contract strictly as technical. And for me, that's a bit of a vacation. Not that it's easy, but it frees me of wider responsibilities. Somebody says, program this thing, and I love it. It's a beautiful challenge inside there to do this. But I'm free of the terrifying fear of the overarching responsibility of the project being good or happening, and I'm just making my widgets, sometimes literally called widgets. So
Okay.
that's one of the joys of contracting on a bigger team, is that I'm just one element, and that can be really relaxing.
You're just a
Right.
cog. Yeah.
So
Happily
sometimes it's
spinning.
nice just to be the cog instead
Right.
of the machine itself. This is a really good question from Bobo Laveau, and I'm going to put this out there for you, Amor.
Sure.
How much do your personal feelings about a license impact the work? Is it easier with a license you care about because you have knowledge, or is it harder because you have feelings and you have to put those aside to focus on what the company sees as the vision?
It's a really good question.
Yeah.
That is a fantastic question. And over the years, I've had, I would say, the full spectrum in terms of the level of comfort, or not just comfort, but how much I care about what the license might be. And, sometimes it's tougher, you know, uh, but I think really what it boils down to for me as a designer who is in that game working on it, it's really finding the things about the license that you can love, right? It's uh I've been lucky enough over the last several years to be able to work on things that really, really interest me. But definitely there have been times where um maybe it's just not the subject matter that I'm incredibly interested in. And in those cases, it is more difficult, but I certainly uh kind of try to put all that aside, and within the context of the game, try to find things that I really, really love and enjoy. So one of my first projects as kind of like the main designer was and this was a very long time ago, was Dancing with the Stars. And very, very interesting show to watch. I've watched it before, but I'm not Dancing with the Stars fan, right? I don't I don't get in there to but one really compelling thing that came out of it was uh you know part of the design was, can they're like, can you somehow figure out how to choreograph your own dances, right? Because you have a character, they're going to do a dance. And it was more socially leaning in terms of the kind of game it was. And so, like, it would be on Facebook, things like that, its own app. And what ultimately came out of it, after spitballing ideas, brainstorming, things like that, we ended up coming up with an idea that I made it a little bit more like a puzzle game, in that your character will learn different moves over the type of the game, dance moves. And when you choreograph it, you basically have the list of moves. And because we wanted the dance to look like a legitimate dance, only certain moves would lead into the next one. And so, long story short, I kind of hid like a little puzzle funness into it that I think most people wouldn't have expected in a game like that. And what was really fascinating on the tech side was that because these were dances, we actually motion captured the dance. So
Oh,
we had dancers from the show, some of the coaches from the show work with us and figure out how can we do 60, 70 different little pieces of dance movement that could all chain together in different ways. And the short version of that was I took something like Dancing with the Stars and I turned it to something that I would play, something that really interests me and is really interesting. And what's really fun by the end of the day when you build a dance and you put it into the game, your characters would do this two-person dance together, and it was generated by the player by taking groups of 10 to 12 dance moves that could chain into another 10 to 12 dance moves. And it's really about finding, when you work in IP and licensed games, it's about continuing to find the fun for you and still, again, be faithful and respectful to what's going on. And so that's a prime example of I didn't dive into that game in a way that I personally would have been all, gung ho about. But uh, I'm very proud of the fact that I built a really fun puzzle game within this social Facebook game where people could build cool dances. And that came back as one of the most fun things within that game.
Oh wow! That
Super
see,
cool.
the more
Yeah.
you explained that game, the more impressed I became. Especially when you said it was a Facebook social game at the end.
Oh, yeah.
It's like that's impressive to do in that kind of a space. That's kind of
Mhm.
crazy. And I think in a
Everyone wants
relationship
to
like
play it
that,
now.
yeah,
Everybody
right.
wants
It's like
to play it
suddenly
right
this
now.
game is there's gonna be a resurgence for this
Right.
game.
We did sunset it a couple years ago because it had been going for a while, but there was a lot of people who really enjoyed that aspect of it, and it certainly as we were building it, the team was like, "There's something fun here. This is something we could really like get into ourselves," and that's always I had a wonderful experience doing something like that, and I think going forward was always like, what is my dance mechanic is what I've said out loud to myself. What is the thing that I can make that is truly interesting to me and still fits within whatever this license is?
That's great, and it sets up a perfect question. Ziba, what's your dance mechanic?
Oh, my dance mechanic is absolutely writing. Not that I want it, not that I meant it to be, but I keep making games where you write in it.
Oh.
We should have
Yeah.
had him on last time, Katie. He
No,
would have been
no.
great with
We can do
writers.
part 3. We
We
have
do part
writers
3.
coming
That's
up.
true.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Talking
to the extent that I'm like, this is really limiting my commercial potential. Nobody wants to type on a gamepad. I need to stop making games where you write words in them. But I just find it's been such a, I did a game about writing poetry and now a game about writing the letters, and I'm doing more in that area, and I've done some other stuff lesser in the past, but it's just such a cool way to invite players to bring so much. It's one of the fuller bandwidth. Aside from like talking and yelling at something, writing is one of the quickest ways for a player to input so much of what is their thoughts and in such a broad spectrum into a game that I'm kind of addicted to inviting them to do that.
It's a very different mechanic than I think most people are used to, right? Because like you said, most of us are used to, well, those of us of a certain age can remember a time when words were a thing in games. But it's definitely one of those things where you think of a game, you think of, the touch screen on your iPhone, or you're thinking of a controller, or, WASD on your keyboard. You're not thinking of actually having to compose.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, I was thinking about old games like Zork and the King's Quest and whatnot, and I did play some of those where they're writing, but the creative aspect for the player in those is puzzle solving. You're being creative in those, and when you solve that, you need to write a very homogenized string of characters.
Right.
What really grabbed me as a kid, it was this project called Kid Writer, and the top half was sort of like a stencil thing where you could put just pictures from a library on your monochrome screen. In the bottom half, you could write whatever you wanted in a few pages of it.
Oh.
And it wasn't a game. It was just you could make these little files and have the pictures and then the words next to them. And that really grabbed me. Years later, I made a poetry writing game, et cetera, and I've done some other stuff. And I went to my parents' house back in the Midwest, and I grabbed that copy of the game. I had the box. I looked at the address on the back, and it was like right next to my office in Boston. Like that company came from right there. I don't know what that means. It doesn't really mean anything, but it was delightful.
It's still cool. That's
Yeah,
very
it's
cool.
very cool.
Yeah, that's a good feeling, right?
We
You feel
have
like-
the Reader Rabbit fan club being being referenced in the chat. That's such a different. I don't think I've ever heard of the game you were talking about, but it sounds like a really cool idea, and I could see where it would absolutely kind of grab an imagination
motivate,
and
yeah.
run with it. Yeah, and run with it.
You can get away with such low production values when you invite a player to produce themselves.
I was just gonna ask, is like, how does that impact like the other things of the games? We're hearing Amor talk about is like stringing moves together to dance and motion capturing. It's like, what does that translate into? In a game based, solely on word and creating using the English language, as opposed to what we're all used to, right? Which is graphics and video and all of these things. What does that production value look like?
Well, I didn't mean to knock Luigi, our artist. He's amazing. Clark, great music. What I meant in terms of like design, I get to cheat on some corners in design. At least I do. Like asking someone to write, particularly if it's personal, is a challenge in and of itself. You don't need to add scoring to that. You don't need to have quantitative feedback. I've found people will find it its own reward to have strung something together and feel that they are done with it in a lot of ways. And I'm curious, Amor, that's one of the things I also, such for my work doing creative stuff and writing, I contracted for a while at Harmonix, and they're in town. I've talked to a lot of people there. And one of the things that was always a crazy debate or struggle there is giving quantitative feedback on creative tasks. So how did you handle evaluating the value of someone's dance they strung together?
Right. Yeah. I mean, there is no easy way to do that. And so, because that was one of the first things when we looked at it, it's like, how do we evaluate this? I mean, they strung some moves together. And what it came down to when we were working with the choreographer was the complexity, of the move. And while that doesn't necessarily, one flourish may look greater than another, but is probably easier. Obviously, you can't really quantify that in an easy way. But we looked at complexity in the context of the game. So if it was a more complex move and you could chain more moves in a row that were more complex, then the in-game judge would give you a bit of a higher score. But it's true. When you look at the quality of the move, obviously you could look at it and be like, oh man, this doesn't look nearly as cool as some of these that are less complex. And so that was definitely one hard point for us in that game, and going into it and kind of arriving where we did with it. We certainly knew that. And but part of that was part of our offset was we designed around that, in that some of the less complex moves, if you have more of them, you got a slight bump in score, knowing that you chained more moves because they were not just easier, but you could generally, because the relationship of the more complex moves to the time used for the move is generally more complicated the longer the move. So if you could fit more simple moves in the chain, then you got a slight bump in the score. And so we tried to offset that a little bit, saying, okay, well, and that also does kind of compensate a little bit, but there was no perfect way to really address it in that situation.
That's cool though, that you had to come up with that problem, and resolve the issue of, what does scoring a dance move look like in a video game?
Instead of just saying, let's make it RNG. And,
right. It's just because
7.5,
that would instantly annoy
sure.
players, right? If it was just, it would become really obvious very fast, I would imagine.
Right.
It was just a random number that was spit out after somebody spent 5 minutes trying to string moves together, right?
Yeah, it was certainly, and we had some little there's a lot of spreadsheets, which is a thing that we do in game design. For those that don't know, if you do a lot of systems design, there's a lot of spreadsheets, and there's all these little hidden values that we would put in the dance moves, in terms of like not just the raw like time that the move would take to do, because we needed to know that for the animation, but then also like how many of these can they add to the dance too. So there's a lot of hidden things, and then there was like a modified score value in there as well. So it's really giving the player the experience that, hey, they had the agency to string these together. They got to make something cool from it that they were proud of and enjoyed, and they got a cool score out of it, hopefully. And if not, they kind of can take a hard look at that and go, oh wow, these more complex moves are generally worth more, so I might just do that. So
Cool.
So the bottom line is you built a game where players would end up respecting the stars far more than they did when they started. This stuff is hard to do.
yeah.
Wow.
Not that
No
the
kidding.
stars are doing the choreography, I don't think, but I haven't seen it. Yeah, I
So-
was just looking at this comment from
RoboTinker. Yeah.
RoboTinker, yes.
Kind Words is such an interesting case study of community being nice and helpful instead of toxic. It's so refreshing. That is really high praise, because that is not an easy thing for
It's
any
the
game
dream.
to pull off.
Rick and
That's
I
the
dream
dream,
about this night, every night.
right?
Yeah. We
Like,
wake
why
up
are
going,
they so mad?
oh wait, that was just a dream. Yeah.
So it also prompts an interesting question. Does that factor into your thinking? Community reception is so it in the case of Kind Words, Ziba, did any thought go into how will this be received? What are the potential, flashpoints that this could, tick somebody off, or is it just gonna take someone the wrong way and they're off and running with a rant on Twitter? What
I mean, Kind Words was initially designed under the fortunately correct assumption that most people are good and well behaved and want nice things and will try and be that way, and that the majority of trouble on the internet is it gets our attention because it has an outsized influence. That
Absolutely.
a small percentage of trolls can make huge noises in most ecosystems for a game. They can
Nice.
ruin a lot of experiences, in part because there's just a lot of rewards or ways that they can see their actions reflected in the game, and that they can basically play their own meta game on top of a game to get what they want out of it at the expense of the rest of the community. And so that's a lot of what Kind Words, the restrictions we sort of designed it around, are removing out all these quantitative rewards and so many of these mechanisms just for reward, period. So that there are extremely few traditional game rewards in there, and very exceedingly little amount of your own identity that persists in any way. I think of the stream of content that players put into the game as going into like a moving body of water more than into a pool. And you put something in, it exists for a little while. And if it was great, people like it. And if it was bad, it washes away. But a few minutes later, it's just a whole new set of content. Mm-hmm. So bad stuff just doesn't get to ripple and spread. It was a lot of how the design works. And we can do that because it's such a limited, you can't apply that to League of Legends or something, because they have to have identity and these sessions that persist where I know who you are for this period of time because we're having an interaction. So our game is entirely designed around being able to have these very transient existences.
Definitely. And how, hearing that, it just dawned on me that this is a multiplayer game, right? Kind Words.
It's kind of an MMO.
Huh?
It's kind of an MMO. Yeah.
It's kind of an MMO. So I apologize. I wasn't familiar with the game prior to today. But it's a challenge in my mind to create a game for a community. It's a whole other thing to create for a multiplayer game where you do have so many challenges. Because again, you've got people interacting with your creation and with each other to some greater or lesser extent, and pretty much all of it. And like you said, in the example you gave for Kind Words, the content just kind of flows by, so it doesn't persist. But I imagine more in the things that you create, that's not the case, and you're maybe not so lucky that it's here and gone. So how do multiplayer considerations factor in with the projects you work on?
It varies greatly depending on the game. And so I can speak to we did a game called Super Fight, gosh, 5 years ago or so, maybe a little more, and it's based on a card game.
Based on the card game.
Based on the card game.
I have that game.
And what was really fascinating is the short version of is people would draw cards to create a fighter, It's kind of like the playground conversation some kids might have: who would win in a fight, Batman versus Superman, right? But in Super Fight, you generate a fighter, which could be anything, could be fictional, non-fictional character in this deck of cards, and then they have these weird modifiers like has a rocket launcher, which is pretty cool, right? Or has two peg legs, right? So it's just a silly game, but boiling it down to the social interactions, because this was a very online multiplayer game. Yeah, it was about, as Ziba said, certain things that would have to persist, right? And in our game, we didn't let a lot of things persist. A lot of it was captured in the moment, where the cards would get drawn, you'd have your conversation, nothing was typed or sent out. It was actually heavily reliant on voice chat, which was also kind of weird at the time, because imagine doing that. But we did add some wonderful tools so you can, easily remove someone if they're being a troll or disruptive.
Oh, good.
But yeah, there was not a lot of persistence other than, hey, this was their name and this is the number of games they've played and some very basic stats. But otherwise, none of the context of what was in there was really saved, because part of the design was we didn't really want to, we didn't want to save some of those potentially trolly or bad conversations. So it's kind of a sliding scale depending on the type of game that you want, and you have to really think about early on those interactions, what those will look like, so you can design around them.
Right. I can just imagine like the Dancing with the Stars community going full on toxic over bad dance moves or something.
I have a question for both of you, and that is, we all have our origin stories. So, what did you play early on that you were so enthralled or fascinated or hated the design that that motivated you to get into design, because you could either do it better or you wanted to be as good as? Like, what was that aha moment, or moments that you had, if there were more than one? What was the game or the moment or the company that made you think, I want to do this?
I had a real clear kick in the pants, and it came embarrassingly late. I played a ton of games and all that, and for some reason, I did a degree in computer science. I just didn't really think about a career in games. I was 7 years into an IT career doing PHP programming and stuff. I'm working at a university, and the university hires a bunch of undergrads to make a little MMO tour of the campus.
Cute.
So my students come on there. And my department's job was to host the back end for it. And so I kind of got to see the sausage they were making. It was my job just to sort of like prop it up and get it going. And I'm sure they're not listening. I don't generally like to talk ill about anyone in the industry. It was a terrible, terrible game, and it made me angry. And I just looked at this thing as like, what am I doing here? Why am I on this end of it here? Absolutely. I'm not even at their company. I'm just sort of like holding up this thing. And I have so much passion and feelings about how it should be done right. And that's when I heard a neighboring university run a radio ad about a serious game design master degree, and I started taking night classes after that.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
So
That's
it was,
really cool.
I almost didn't ask the negative, and it was like I was, for me, it's like, oh, I had this aha moment in a game and I fell in love with games in general, and here I am. But for you, it truly was, I can do this better. That's great. That's fantastic. Amor?
That's amazing. That is by the way, anybody in a community going, I know better than you do. I think Ziba just gave you the perfect way to basically go prove it, right?
We always
Go
say,
prove it.
go ahead, come do it. You have our blessing. Come
Exactly.
on and do it.
Amor, how about you?
Have you ever had one of those moments that really defined what you do, but you never realized it until years later?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah, so I go back to this moment when I tell this story on occasion. When I was about 8 or 9, I played the NES for the first time, and my first game was The Legend of Zelda. And long story short, I became obsessed with that game, and I played it so much as my parents would let me. And it got to the point where I started drawing the maps of the dungeons in my notebook, and I had mapped out every dungeon, down to like where the secret, walls where you could put bombs are, locations of things. I had little notes scrawled on the side. I had a half full notebook of dungeon maps. And then I even had like a couple pages of the world map where I just kind of figured out where everything was so I could get there if I needed to. And looking back at that, I think that was really one of my first, like, I got really obsessed with the game. But what really tipped me off in terms of, oh, that might have been my moment, was when I completed the game, did it twice. I had this notebook that was like half full of dungeons. I was like, what if I made my own dungeons? And I just started drawing dungeon maps that had nothing to do with the game. And I started going, oh, this is where I would put these enemies. This is where I would do it. And then I showed my friends and I'd be like, if you go through here and you place the bomb here or you use your boomerang. And that was one of my first moments where I designed content for a game, but never really made a game. And so I look back on that after a very long trip to figuring out what I wanted to do with my life. I was like, should have held on to that memory a little more tightly, because that was a catalyst. And I think there's so many moments of that underscore my time with games, whether it was.
Do you still have the books?
I do not.
Oh no!
Unfortunately,
That breaks my heart.
Yeah, it broke my heart too.
Yeah.
It broke my heart. But that underscores so many moments where, if a game had a map editor, I was in it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I made so many maps for Command and Conquer and Red Alert, I was really into RTSs for a very long time. StarCraft, did some StarCraft mods and things like that. And that is really, it was never like, hey, I could do better, but it was always me being curious about what am I capable of. And that is that became the leap of faith that was my jumping into the games industry. Because when I joined the games industry, I had zero professional experience. I was just like, hey, I love games and I've made a lot of random stuff on my own, but I will work super hard to learn what I need to learn. And so, yeah.
Right on.
That's really cool. These are probably two of the best answers to questions I've ever heard.
Yeah, I love that.
I can do it better than you.
Hate, but
What did you say?
I regret that my answer was full of hatred, but
No, it wasn't, because no, you know what? It wasn't. It was full of positivity, because if you see something that you don't like about the world, you need to change it. And that's what you did. And if that's the gaming world, so be it.
Yeah.
It reflects on everything.
Totally.
No,
I mean, I've always been a fan of the idea if you can do something better than somebody else, go do it.
Come and do
right?
it.
Go do it and show the world your vision for it. I loved that answer. That was great.
Yeah.
Gentlemen, we're getting pretty close to the end of our time here. I really appreciate both of you coming on and doing this. You guys have such different experiences, but so similar points of views. It's really interesting to me to hear your experiences, to hear, the differences between your approach to design, but ultimately we all end up kind of in the same place, don't we? We end up with this passion for games. We end up with, just because of the way the industry is, we sort of have to think about the same things all the time and getting us from point A to point B in a project. One of the last questions I have, and this is, Ziba, this is probably more of a you concern than an Amor concern, because Amor is just straight dev. He doesn't have to worry about budgets as much and where are they coming from. Not that I'm sure Amor doesn't have a budgetary stress in everything he does, because we all do in this industry. But Ziba, since it's your studio, how does that complicate the whole process?
Yeah, I would say I thought too big on a project once, and I went too big for it, and I learned firsthand a lot of the pains of. I've watched a lot of my friends grow, right? And you have their talents in what direction they want to grow their studio. And it's taken a long time for me to realize that, like, I'm not interested in getting a bunch of funding and hiring a bunch of people. That's just not where my heart is. It's not where I'd want to do. And sort of having that realization and watching some of my other friends deal with these very grown-up responsibilities of HR and all that other stuff, it's really helped me make peace with the sphere in which I think of my ideas and the tools that I want to. And I mean, if you pick any set of game styles or concepts, and you can whittle it down. There's still enough to have an infinite world of ideas into. So I don't feel like I'm too restricted in like, I wish I could think in these directions. I can. I just have to think in those directions with these reduced elements. And I'm feeling pretty good about that. And I feel like budget is not my biggest problem.
It's
That's a good place
a
to
nice
be.
problem to not have. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. Amor, how about you? How does because I was at WB Games for a while, and I understand here's the ask, here's how much money you can spend, and no more than that. How does
In
that
between is the
constrain your
miracle.
thinking?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's like I need a $47 suit. I got $1.50. Make it work. Right.
Right. Given my role and given the place I have on my team, it's not as big of a focus, but it definitely affects my work, right? So if there's a certain amount of content that needs to go in the game, or a certain amount of features that we would like to see, it's really balancing those against each other and saying, man, what can't we live without? And how can we make this work given the number of hands that we have, right? And so, even though I'm not the person making that decision directly, it's really championing the things that we as a team really are passionate about, whether it's a piece of content that needs to go in the game, whether it's a feature that we'd really like to see, and hopefully arriving at something that makes sense, right? And still gets us a wonderful experience and the kind of things we'd like to see in the game. Unfortunately, that means things get cut out or deprioritized, and it sucks. But you got to weigh that against what you really want to see and what you're really passionate about. That should be front and center in the game.
Pick your battles.
Pick your battles.
Awesome. Guys, again, thank you so much for hanging out with us for the past hour. Really appreciate it. Before we go, I have one last thing. I'm just gonna give you a couple of minutes each. Tell me what you're working on. Tell me what your passion projects are, and tell me what the thing you do when nobody's looking is. That, like, if you could just do whatever you wanted with your time and nobody was gonna judge, what would you do? Weekend's coming. Passions. We'll go alphabetically. We'll let Amor start.
Well, I'm a Twitch streamer, like Rick here, and I really think there's some fascinating engagements between a broadcaster and folks watching them, and so that is. If it were up to me, I'd be exploring the space of games that make sense in a space where you can engage with them also as a viewer who's not necessarily playing the game. Which is part of what I touched on with Super Fight. It actually connected into Twitch, and people could vote on little things, not unlike how some of the Jackbox games work too. And so, in my own time, I think about like, how can you make a compelling experience that's equally as interesting to those that are watching it, but not actively playing it, and not rain on the parade of the player who is actually streaming it and affecting their experience. So part of my passion is just trying to figure out how like you can make something interesting in that space, whether it's just seeing things that are out, like how people play games, or just spinning on ideas that we have. We did a game at Pipeworks called Rival Peak, which kind of tapped into Facebook broadcasting that did that on a larger scale. If you guys are curious about that, you could go to pipeworks.com. But what's really incredible is that passion kind of can carry over into the work that we do, at the studio that I'm at.
Very cool. Ziba, before we go to you, Robo Tinker wants to know, what's your favorite Pokemon? Amor. Uh-oh. This could be bad if you answer poorly. Just letting you know.
I feel like this is a trick question. Just kidding. We don't have to answer that.
Okay, you're safe. You're absolved. You don't have to do it. Ziba, how about you? Not the Pokemon question. We'll let that one go.
Super serious.
There was fear in your eyes for a moment. You don't have to answer the Pokemon one. But
I'm going to be honest about the Pokemon one. I'm too old for Pokemon.
Uh-oh.
I missed it. Just
That's
go for
not
it.
a thing. I'm older than you.
No, I'm not too old to enjoy it. I was too old for the marketing push. Like, it didn't hit
Oh,
me.
fair.
I was not there for it, and so it wasn't part of my childhood. So I do not have an emotional connection to those little things.
Gotcha.
They can all go bounce off into the forest where they live. I don't care.
That's it. We're getting hate mail now. Great. Thanks. We
Name
haven't had
two or
mail in
three.
a while. This will be
All right.
good.
Whatever. A lot of my projects, like Kind Words, have this sort of this gravitas. Oh, it's going to make people feel good. It's going to be this grand thing. Or my sailing games to be this big, important, connective thing. Or my some other ones. I just have this. I want to put out these big, polished productions, and so I can't always do that. Just carry the weight of that, and I often will roughly snap and just want to make something absolutely dumb and small. And my last best example of this is Block Pooper 9. It's 100% free on Steam, no ads, nothing, because it's just too dumb to pay for.
Right on.
It's basically Smash Brothers, but the only move is pooping blocks out of the other person. And it's like poorly optimized. It barely works, but it's a lot of fun. And so
It's therapy in a game.
Right?
Maybe about a week ago, Luigi and I kind of hit another snapping point, and this is I don't want to say it's a terrible idea, but here's the idea we've been working on for a week now. Yes, I'm going to give you a week-old idea, which who knows what it end up at. We are working on the cast of a popular 90s sitcom all died tragically while they were filming their final episode. And then a couple years later, mysteriously, a PlayStation 1 game appeared with the full cast doing their last episode. This is that haunted ghost last episode of their game. But I want it to be a sincere comedy. And so I spent this week writing an actual heartwarming comedy episode of a sitcom about a fictional family. And to me, that is my guilty. Shouldn't I be doing something a bit more commercial to float my company? No, I want to write this sitcom right now.
Do what you love.
You know
I
what?
love it.
Yeah.
Save. I'm like, okay, when does this come out? Because I want to check it out.
I do
I'm
too.
sold.
When you
Yep.
do what you love, I think that sells itself. I think when you're forced to
That's
do
a
something
that's
that
that's
you
a
don't
beautiful sentiment, but go ahead and look at Block Pooper's numbers. It doesn't really pan out.
Hey, I just gave you the Friday push to prod
Yep.
month.
You
Like
just got the link.
I linked it in chat, so you're
This looks
golden.
great.
By the way, in case you're
And
not
it wins
following
on
chat,
name alone.
in case you're not following chat, Ziba, your friend John Bellini is here giving you all kinds of love. So
Oh, hey,
just say
John.
hi to John.
Oh, he wants to know what the sitcom game is called. Married with Family.
Married with now I really need to see this.
Right?
This has to happen.
Oh
I'm
my
It has
stoked.
to happen.
Right on.
That's great. Well, thank you for being here. This was great. I love the opportunity to talk to new people, learn new things about this industry, and share that with others. I think game design is really a very misunderstood role, right? I'm almost positive very few people outside the industry fully grasp what it is. So thank you guys for coming in and sharing what it means to you, what you each do, some of the projects you've worked on, and how you approach the task. It was very insightful, and I am sure that everybody really enjoyed it. In fact, comments from chat proved me right. So thank you guys. Appreciate it. Katie, thank you as always. It's always a
you're very
pleasure to see you.
Thank you too. It was wonderful getting to know both of you, and of course more of you, Rick, as always.
Yeah.
Thanks very much for sharing your Friday afternoon with us. I really, really appreciate it. That was excellent.
This was delightful.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you guys. You guys have a great weekend. Everybody in chat, thank you for joining along. This is officially, and I'll leave this on all versions of this going forward. This is the largest audience we've had for recording a Friday Push to Prod in the
Yes, it is.
20 some odd episodes we've done. So
Yep,
thank you guys.
excellent.
Thank you for hanging out. Appreciate it. Have a great weekend, everybody. Stay safe. Be well. Bye-bye.